My mother-in-law planned to ruin my pregnancy, but what happened next?
Hello everyone. Enjoy these relaxing moments while you watch.
Eleanor stepped through the iron gates of the mansion, her heart filled with joy. This morning's prenatal checkup had been wonderful. The doctor said the baby was developing healthily, and all the indicators were good. Eleanor gently stroked her belly, where she could feel the small life growing inside her. This baby was her hope, her future with James. She entered the living room, her eyes immediately meeting Isabella's. Her mother-in-law was sitting on the sofa, her cold eyes sweeping over Eleanor like sharp blades. Isabella, a powerful and arrogant woman, controlled everything in this household. "Eleanor, you're back." Isabella's voice rang out, barely hiding her disdain. Eleanor smiled faintly, trying not to take it to heart. "Yes, I just got back from the hospital. Everything's fine, and the doctor said the baby is developing well," she replied, hoping Isabella would share in her joy. But instead, Isabella smirked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Do you think this baby will secure your place in my family?" Those words felt like a dagger straight to Eleanor's heart. She froze, unable to respond. Why was Isabella always so cruel? She had only wanted to share some good news, but her happiness was extinguished instantly. "I don't understand what you mean," Eleanor said, trying to stay calm, though her voice trembled slightly. "My meaning is very clear," Isabella stood, approaching Eleanor, her gaze icy. "You're just a country girl, nothing special. If not for James, do you think you'd have a place in this house?" Eleanor bit her lip, fighting back tears. She felt drained of all strength. She wanted James here, wanted him to protect her, but he was away on a business trip, leaving her to face Isabella alone. "Mrs. Isabella, I know I'm not perfect, but I love James and will do everything to make this family happy," Eleanor tried to respond, even as her heart ached. "Love? That means nothing in this world, Eleanor," Isabella sneered, then turned and walked away, leaving Eleanor standing silently in the living room. That evening, the family dinner was tense. Isabella sat at the head of the table, her gaze commanding everyone around her. With James still away, the meal consisted of Isabella, Eleanor, and James's younger sister, Caroline, who always sided with their mother. "Eleanor," Isabella suddenly addressed her daughter-in-law, her tone laced with mockery. "I heard you just got back from the hospital. Is everything okay?" Eleanor nodded slightly. "Yes, the doctor said the baby is healthy." "That's good," Isabella replied, but her smile was full of derision. "But don't you think you should be more careful? Being pregnant isn't an excuse to be lazy. This family has standards." Caroline chuckled, fanning the flames. "Exactly, Eleanor. You should remember that not everyone is easily accepted into this family." Eleanor gripped her napkin tightly, trying to stay composed. But Isabella wasn't finished. She continued, "I just hope you're not using this baby to tie James down. A man like him needs a strong woman, not someone who's constantly dependent." "Mother Isabella." Eleanor could no longer hold back, her voice trembling with anger. "I've never thought of it that way. I just want to build a happy family with James and our child." "A happy family?" Isabella scoffed, looking at Eleanor as if she were a fool. "You know nothing about responsibility and sacrifice. I wonder what James was thinking when he married you." Eleanor bowed her head, swallowing her tears. With James not there to defend her, she felt as if she were fighting alone. Caroline continued to laugh, while Isabella sat tall, satisfied with Eleanor's silence. The dinner ended in tension and Eleanor's unspoken pain. She wanted to run away, to scream, but all she could do was suppress her feelings, as she always had. Later, in her room, Eleanor sank into the armchair near the window. The faint moonlight highlighted the tears streaming down her face. She gently caressed her belly, as if to console herself. "Baby, I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll protect you, no matter how hard things get." A sense of isolation engulfed Eleanor. She couldn't confide in James because every time she tried, he would brush it off, saying, "Don't worry about it, Mom just wants the best for you." But was this truly the best? Eleanor didn't know how much longer she could endure. She felt trapped in a cage with no way out. The next morning, Eleanor woke up feeling utterly exhausted. She had tossed and turned all night, Isabella's cruel words echoing in her mind. She quietly got out of bed and went downstairs, hoping for some peace over breakfast. But the cold atmosphere in the dining room made her pause. Isabella was already there, holding a teacup, her icy gaze fixed on Eleanor. Next to her sat Caroline, scrolling through her phone and giggling occasionally. "Eleanor, you're up late," Isabella remarked with sarcasm, her eyes never leaving her cup. "Pregnant women shouldn't oversleep. It's not good for the baby." Eleanor forced a strained smile. "I was just feeling a bit tired, Mother." Isabella smirked. "Tired? You're only a few months along and already complaining of fatigue. How do you expect to take care of a family later?" She glanced at Caroline, as if waiting for her agreement. Caroline quickly chimed in, her tone mocking. "Mom's right. Eleanor, you should toughen up. I've heard modern women manage to run companies while pregnant." Eleanor clenched her fists, struggling to stay calm. "I'll try to be more careful." Isabella took a sip of tea, then placed her cup down. "Good. Oh, I had Rosa prepare a special herbal tea for you this morning. It's excellent for the baby. Drink it." She motioned for Rosa, the longtime housekeeper, to bring out a steaming cup of tea. Rosa set the cup in front of Eleanor, her eyes briefly showing concern before she hurried away. Eleanor eyed the tea, its faint aroma unsettling her. "Thank you, Mother, but I don't think I can have tea today. The doctor advised me to avoid anything unfamiliar." Isabella's expression darkened instantly. "The doctor? Are you implying I don't know how to care for my own grandchild?" "This tea was recommended by a close friend who's an expert in herbal remedies." Eleanor's heart raced. "No, that's not what I meant. It's just..." Isabella cut her off, her tone sharp. "Drink it." Eleanor picked up the cup, her hands trembling slightly. She took a small sip, the bitterness spreading across her tongue. She forced herself to swallow, despite her growing unease. Isabella, satisfied, leaned back in her chair. "See? Nothing to worry about. From now on, Rosa will prepare this for you every morning. Make sure you drink it." Eleanor nodded faintly, but an inexplicable sense of foreboding lingered. That evening, the family dinner was tense again. James had just returned from his business trip. Eleanor's heart lifted slightly, hoping her husband's presence would ease her loneliness. "How have you been lately?" James asked gently, taking Eleanor's hand. Eleanor smiled faintly. "I'm fine. Just a little tired." Isabella sat at the head of the table, looking at the couple with a displeased expression. "She's tired because she doesn't take care of herself. I've told her to drink herbal tea every morning, but her attitude has been reluctant." James turned to Eleanor. "You should listen to Mom, she only wants what's best for you." Eleanor froze. She had hoped James would recognize his mother's excessive control, but he still didn't see it. She only nodded slightly, her heart heavy. Isabella smirked, her eyes triumphant. "That's right. Pregnant women need to listen and not have to be reminded so much." The atmosphere at dinner became tense. Caroline chimed in, her tone half joking, half mocking. "I heard that back in the countryside, people like Eleanor have all sorts of folk remedies. Maybe she could share a recipe or two with Mom." Caroline's giggles echoed through the quiet room. Eleanor felt her face flush. She clenched her napkin tightly, trying to contain herself. But James only chuckled lightly, not noticing the mockery. The rest of the dinner passed in silence. Eleanor barely ate anything. She felt utterly out of place in this house. After dinner, Eleanor sat alone in the garden, her eyes staring into the distance. Rosa approached quietly, her voice low. "Madam Eleanor, are you all right?" Eleanor turned and shook her head gently. "I'm fine, Rosa." Rosa hesitated, then took a small packet from her pocket. "This is the herb Madam Isabella asked me to use for your tea. But it smells odd, very pungent, not like typical herbs." Eleanor took the packet, her heart sinking. She opened it and sniffed. The strong, unpleasant odor unsettled her. Something didn't feel right. "Rosa, do you know who supplied these herbs?" Eleanor asked, her voice low. Rosa shook her head. "Madam Isabella only said they came from an old friend." Eleanor clenched the packet tightly in her hand, fear creeping over her. What was Isabella doing? Why was she forcing her to drink this tea? She gently touched her belly, a surge of anxiety rising within her. She couldn't sit still any longer. But if she told James, would he believe her? Rosa looked at Eleanor, her face filled with concern. "Madam Eleanor, if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. I'm always here." Eleanor nodded slightly, grateful. "Thank you, Rosa. I'll think about it." Back in her room, Eleanor stood before the mirror, staring into her own eyes. They no longer sparkled, they were clouded with worry and exhaustion. "Eleanor, you have to be strong," she told herself. "You can't let them harm your child." But how could she confront Isabella when James always took his mother's side? Eleanor felt as if she were fighting alone in this house. She gently cradled her belly, whispering, "I'll protect you, my baby. No matter what it takes." The next morning, Eleanor woke up feeling groggy and dizzy. Her head spun, and her stomach churned uncomfortably. She struggled to sit up, her hand resting on her belly, sensing the faint movements of her little one. When she went downstairs, Isabella was already seated with her usual cup of herbal tea. Rosa stood quietly by her side, avoiding Eleanor's gaze. "Eleanor, you're up earlier today," Isabella said, her tone cold but laced with hidden meaning. "The tea is ready. Drink it, it's good for your baby." Eleanor looked at the steaming cup on the table. Its smell made her shudder. The image of the packet Rosa had given her the night before flashed in her mind, intensifying her suspicions. But with James still away, she had no one to confide in. She forced a strained smile. "Thank you, Mother." "Eleanor, don't make me remind you again. You wouldn't want anything bad to happen to the baby, would you?" Isabella's piercing gaze froze Eleanor in place, her voice dripping with menace. Eleanor picked up the cup, but this time, she only pretended to sip before setting it down. Isabella smirked, satisfied, not realizing Eleanor's silent defiance. Throughout the day, Isabella found endless ways to control Eleanor. She ordered Rosa to rearrange Eleanor's room, changing everything without consulting her. "This room feels too cramped. A more open space will be better for her," Isabella told Rosa, her tone commanding. When Eleanor walked in, she was shocked to see her familiar belongings had been moved. Her favorite pillow, the wedding photo with James, everything had disappeared. "Mother, did you change my room?" Eleanor tried to stay calm. "Yes. I just want what's best for you." "This room needed to be reorganized to suit someone who's about to become a mother," Isabella replied coldly. "But, at least you could have asked me first." Isabella turned sharply, her eyes cutting like knives. "Don't challenge me, Eleanor. You're living in this house, and I have the right to decide everything. If you don't like it, you can leave." Eleanor felt a lump rise in her throat. She knew she had no support. James remained oblivious to everything. Swallowing her anger, she stayed silent. That afternoon, Eleanor happened to pass by Isabella's study. The door was slightly ajar. Curious, she stopped when she heard Isabella on the phone. No, I won't let that child be born. It will only complicate everything, Isabella said coldly. Eleanor froze, her heart pounding. Isabella was talking about her baby. A woman's voice replied from the other end of the line. Are you sure, Isabella? Using herbs for too long could be dangerous. Dangerous? I know what I'm doing. I just want to prevent worse problems. That child cannot be allowed to exist. Eleanor backed away, her hands trembling. Her fears weren't just in her imagination. Isabella truly intended to harm her baby. She quickly left the hallway, her heart racing. What should she do? Should she tell James? But would he believe her? That evening, James returned home. Eleanor decided to tell him about her suspicions. James, I need to talk to you, Eleanor said softly, holding his hand, her eyes filled with worry. James frowned. What's wrong? Eleanor. Isabella suddenly appeared, her gaze sharp and cold. James just got back. Let him rest. Don't bother him with nonsense. Eleanor tightened her grip, but James turned to his mother. Mom's right. Let's talk tomorrow, okay? I'm tired tonight. Eleanor stared at James, stunned. He didn't notice the tension in her voice or the fear in her eyes. Swallowing her anxiety, she said nothing more. Isabella glanced at Eleanor, her eyes full of triumph. Late at night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She cradled her belly, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, my baby. I don't know how to protect you, she whispered, her heart filled with despair. She knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. Isabella wasn't just controlling her, she was plotting to harm the baby. Eleanor felt as though she were trapped in a cage with no way out. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating Eleanor's tear-streaked face. She realized that if she didn't act, things would only get worse. The next morning, Eleanor walked downstairs with a heavy heart. Her cautious eyes scanned the living room, where Isabella was chatting with a strange woman. The woman appeared to be in her 40s, slim, with sharp eyes. Eleanor, this is Mrs. Teresa, a close friend of mine, Isabella announced, her tone casual but dripping with disdain. She's an expert in herbal remedies. Teresa gave a thin smile, her gaze briefly sweeping over Eleanor. It's a pleasure to meet you, Eleanor. Isabella has told me so much about you. I've brought some rare herbs, perfect for pregnant women. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. She nodded slightly, trying to hide her unease. Isabella wasted no time and turned to Rosa, commanding, Rosa, bring out the new tea I asked you to prepare. Rosa appeared with a tray holding a steaming teacup. On the tray, Eleanor noticed a small pouch labeled Rilaganti Natural, natural relaxant. Isabella pushed the teacup toward Eleanor. Drink it. Teresa prepared it especially for you. Eleanor frowned slightly. Thank you, but I think I'm feeling a bit tired today. I'll drink it later. Isabella's face darkened immediately. Are you going to defy me again? Teresa went through the trouble of bringing this here. Teresa interjected, her voice soft but loaded with implication. This tea is excellent for expectant mothers. It helps with relaxation and sleep. There's nothing harmful in it. Eleanor clenched her hands tightly, her gaze briefly meeting Rosa's as if searching for support. But Rosa only lowered her eyes, avoiding Eleanor's look. Eleanor reluctantly picked up the teacup, bringing it close to her lips but only pretending to sip before setting it down. Isabella smirked faintly but said nothing more. That afternoon, Eleanor took a moment to breathe in the garden. But as she re-entered the house, she overheard whispers coming from the kitchen. Does Mrs. Isabella really want Eleanor to drink all that tea? Rosa's voice was hesitant. Yes, she told me to make sure Eleanor doesn't skip a single cup, Maria, another housemaid, replied. But the smell is so strange. Do you think it's safe? Rosa asked nervously. Maria hesitated. This is rich people's business. We shouldn't get involved. Eleanor froze outside the door, her heart sinking. Every word felt like a dagger. Isabella wasn't just forcing her to drink the tea, she was coercing the staff to ensure compliance. She turned away, her heart racing. She couldn't remain silent anymore. That evening, James returned home. Eleanor decided it was time for a serious conversation. James, I need to talk to you. Seriously, Eleanor said, sitting across from him in their bedroom. Her voice was firm with determination. James set down his phone and looked at her. What is it, Eleanor? I feel like your mother is controlling me too much. It's not just her words but also what I eat and drink, Eleanor began, struggling to find the right words. James frowned. What do you mean? Eleanor. Isabella's voice rang out from the hallway. She didn't bother to knock, instead pushing the door open and stepping in with an icy glare. What nonsense are you feeding James now? Eleanor clenched her fists. I just want James to understand that I don't feel comfortable being forced to drink things I don't know the source of. Isabella laughed coldly. Oh, so you think I'm trying to harm you? How absurd. Mom, I think Eleanor just feels uneasy. Maybe you shouldn't be so strict, James said hesitantly, trying to mediate. Isabella turned to him, her sharp gaze cutting through the air. James, are you taking her side? Everything I do is for the baby. Eleanor stood up, facing Isabella directly. If you truly care about your grandchild, then let me take care of myself. The tension in the room was palpable. Isabella took a deep breath and gave a chilly smile. Fine. But don't make me regret letting you have your way. She turned and left, leaving James and Eleanor in silence. After Isabella left, James sighed. You've made everything more tense, Eleanor. Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes. You don't understand, James. I feel like your mother is trying to control every aspect of my life. I don't want to drink that tea anymore. James shook his head. Mom only wants what's best for you. You're just overthinking. Get some rest. Eleanor turned away, disappointment washing over her. James still didn't grasp the seriousness of the situation. That night, Eleanor lay awake, listening to the wind howl outside the window. Next to her, James slept soundly, oblivious to her inner turmoil. She sat up, opened the drawer, and took out the pouch of herbs Rosa had given her earlier. She stared at it, suspicion filling her mind. Eleanor, you have to do something. You can't let her keep this up, she whispered to herself. But she knew she couldn't act recklessly. Isabella was powerful, and James wasn't on her side. Eleanor felt as if she were being cornered. She gently cradled her belly, whispering, My baby, I won't let anyone hurt you. No matter what it takes. The next morning, pale sunlight filtered through the window, unable to warm Eleanor's troubled mind. She sat quietly on the bed, her tired eyes staring into the distance. The dizziness and fatigue still lingered. Isabella's words and the conversations she overheard the day before echoed in her head. Eleanor, come down for breakfast, Rosa's voice called from the kitchen. Eleanor slowly made her way down the stairs, her steps heavy with worry. When she entered the dining room, Isabella was already seated at the table. James had not yet returned from work. You're up late again, Isabella said coldly, her gaze sharp with displeasure. Eleanor didn't respond, silently sitting down. Rosa brought over a plate of food and a familiar steaming cup of tea. Eleanor glanced at the tea, the rising steam filling her with unease. Isabella looked at Eleanor, her eyes triumphant. Eleanor, I've added some special ingredients to today's herbal tea. Drink it, Isabella said casually, her eyes gleaming with victory. Eleanor bit her lip, a sense of unease rising within her. Under the table, her hands clenched tightly, her emotions swirling. But she couldn't outright refuse. Isabella wouldn't let it slide. "Thank you, Mother," Eleanor replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She picked up the cup, pretending to sip before setting it back down. Isabella raised an eyebrow slightly but said nothing. The atmosphere in the dining room was suffocatingly heavy. That afternoon, Eleanor decided to find Rosa for answers. She knew Rosa was the only person in this house who showed her any kindness. "Rosa, I need to ask you something," Eleanor said softly, pulling Rosa aside as she was arranging dishes in the kitchen. Rosa flinched and turned around. "What is it, Madam Eleanor?" Lowering her voice, Eleanor's expression became serious. "I want to know about the herbs Mother Isabella asked you to use for my tea. Do you know what they are?" Rosa hesitated, her eyes betraying her worry. I'm not sure. Mrs. Isabella just gave me the packets and told me to prepare them exactly as instructed. But I did notice the smell was odd." Eleanor tightened her fists. "Can you show me those packets?" Rosa glanced around before nodding slightly. "Follow me." She led Eleanor to the storage room, where supplies and food were kept. Rosa rummaged through a small cabinet and took out a packet identical to the ones Isabella had given her before. "These are what she handed me. But I didn't dare ask too many questions," Rosa said quietly. Eleanor took the packet and sniffed it. The pungent, overpowering odor was unlike any herbal tea she'd ever encountered. "Rosa, I need your help. If you see any other herbs or notice anything strange, please let me know," Eleanor pleaded, her eyes filled with urgency. Rosa nodded slightly. "Yes, I'll keep an eye out." Eleanor knew she couldn't act impulsively. Isabella was too cunning, always in control. But she couldn't just sit idly by and let things happen. That evening, Eleanor sat in her room, overwhelmed by despair. James was still not home, and the suffocating loneliness consumed her. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Caroline. "Eleanor, my mother wants to see you in the living room." "She has something to discuss," Caroline said without looking at her before walking away. Eleanor made her way downstairs, her heart heavy with a sense of foreboding. Isabella sat on the sofa, holding a folder in her hand. "Eleanor, I've rearranged your schedule. Starting tomorrow, you won't need to attend family parties or events. Those things aren't good for the baby," Isabella said, her tone commanding. Eleanor was stunned. "But I think I can still attend if I feel well." Isabella smirked. "No. I don't want you to stress yourself. Also, I've spoken with the family doctor to oversee your health instead of your current physician. You won't need to go for outside checkups anymore." Eleanor froze. "You can't make such decisions for me. This is my health and my baby." Isabella's cold eyes bore into hers. "I'm doing this to ensure the safety of the child. You don't understand anything." Eleanor clenched her fists, rage bubbling inside her. But she knew arguing with Isabella would be pointless. Returning to her room, Eleanor felt more hopeless than ever. Isabella wasn't just controlling her diet and drinks, she was interfering with her medical care. She sank onto the bed, cradling her belly as tears streamed down her face. "I'm sorry. I don't know what to do anymore," she whispered. An idea flashed in her mind. She couldn't endure this any longer, but she couldn't fight alone. She wiped her tears, determination igniting in her eyes. "I won't let anyone harm you, my baby. I promise." Late that night, Eleanor woke up gasping for air. She clutched her belly, sweat pouring down her face. Dizziness and nausea overwhelmed her, and she had to steady herself against the wall to avoid collapsing. "I can't keep going like this," she murmured, her hands trembling as she wiped her forehead. In the cold, oppressive mansion, it felt as though everything was working against her. Isabella controlled her every move, every breath. Even James didn't see it. Eleanor stepped onto the balcony, breathing in the cold night air. She gazed at the starry sky, her heart heavy with despair. She felt like she was sinking into darkness with no one to pull her out. Suddenly, whispered voices from the courtyard below made her stop and listen. Mrs. Isabella said to lock the doors carefully. "Don't let Madame Eleanor go outside at night," Rosa's voice whispered. "But why?" "She's not a prisoner," replied Maria, another housemaid. "Eleanor isn't a prisoner, but Mrs. Isabella is afraid she might do something foolish," Rosa murmured, her tone hesitant. Eleanor felt her chest tighten. Isabella didn't even trust her to move freely within her own home. She turned back inside, her eyes resolute. She couldn't let herself be controlled any longer. The next morning, Eleanor kept her composure as she came down for breakfast. Isabella was already seated, holding a cup of tea. James had not returned yet, leaving Eleanor alone to face her cold and calculating mother-in-law. "Eleanor, today's tea is even more special. I've added a bit of wild chamomile to help you sleep better," Isabella said with a smile, her eyes icy. Eleanor looked at the tea, her disgust rising. But she maintained her calm. "Thank you, Mother," Eleanor said, picking up the cup and pretending to sip it without swallowing. Isabella frowned slightly but said nothing, thinking Eleanor had grown accustomed to following orders. That afternoon, Eleanor found Rosa in the kitchen. "Rosa, I need your help," Eleanor whispered, her eyes pleading. Rosa glanced around before nodding slightly. "Madam Eleanor, I also feel uneasy about what Mrs. Isabella is asking." Eleanor handed Rosa a small box. "I'll leave the tea Mother Isabella gives me. Please dispose of it and replace it with regular tea. Don't let her find out." Rosa hesitated for a moment before nodding firmly. "I understand. I'll help you." Eleanor grasped Rosa's hand, gratitude filling her eyes. "Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you." That evening, when James returned home, Eleanor decided to confront him again. "James, I'm really not okay. I feel like your mother is controlling me too much," Eleanor said, holding his hand, her voice filled with worry. James sighed and pulled his hand away. "Eleanor, Mom only wants the best for you. You're overthinking things. No, you don't understand. She's forcing me to drink teas I don't know the origins of, and she's even replaced my doctor." Eleanor's voice broke, tears threatening to fall. James frowned. "I don't think Mom would ever do anything to harm you. You're just stressed." Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. He didn't believe her. She felt small, isolated in her own home. From afar, Isabella watched the conversation unfold, a faint smirk on her lips. She knew James would always side with her. That night, Eleanor sat in her room, her eyes hollow as she stared at the tea on the table. "What should I do?" she murmured, gently stroking her belly. She felt the faint kicks of her baby, the only thing keeping her going. "Eleanor, you can't endure this any longer. You have to act." Eleanor stood and stepped onto the balcony. From a distance, she saw Isabella on the phone in the living room. Her low voice carried faintly through the night. "She still hasn't given in. I'll have to take stronger measures," Isabella muttered. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. Isabella wasn't stopping. She was willing to do anything to eliminate her. She turned back into her room, her hands clenched into fists. Her eyes burned with determination. "I won't stay silent any longer." The next morning, Eleanor woke with a newfound resolve. Gentle sunlight streamed through the curtains, lighting her weary face but sparking determination in her eyes. It was time to act. Eleanor descended the stairs, finding Isabella leisurely seated in the living room, holding her cup of tea. Isabella glanced at her briefly, her usual look of disdain and control evident. "Eleanor, you're up early today. I've had Rosa prepare your tea. Drink it," Isabella ordered, her tone authoritative. Eleanor smiled faintly, hiding the turmoil in her heart. Thank you, Mother. But today I have an appointment with my personal doctor for a checkup. Isabella froze, her expression darkening. A personal doctor? I've already arranged the best doctor for you. You don't need to go anywhere. Eleanor responded calmly but firmly, I believe I have the right to care for my health and my baby. Isabella's lips curled into a sneer, her eyes icy. Who do you think you are to defy me? Eleanor didn't reply. She lowered her head slightly, turned, and walked away. Isabella tightened her grip on her teacup, her eyes flashing with fury. Eleanor quickly arrived at the clinic of Dr. Lucia Morales, an old friend and a trusted obstetrician. Eleanor, how are you? You look exhausted, Lucia said, concern in her eyes. Eleanor placed a small pouch on the table, her expression serious. Lucia, I need your help. This is the tea and herbs my mother-in-law has been forcing me to drink. I want them tested. Lucia frowned, carefully opening the pouch and sniffing it. Her expression immediately grew grave. Eleanor, this smell isn't normal. I'll send this to the lab for testing right away, Lucia assured her. Eleanor nodded, her eyes filled with worry. I need to know the truth. Something feels wrong. Lucia placed a reassuring hand on Eleanor's shoulder. I promise I'll help you. Stay calm. A few days later, Eleanor received a call from Lucia. She rushed to the clinic, her heart pounding with anxiety. Eleanor, the results are in. Lucia placed the file on her desk, her face serious. The tea you've been drinking contains an herb that causes uterine contractions. Prolonged use could lead to miscarriage. Eleanor froze, her heart sinking. She clutched her belly as tears streamed down her face. No, that can't be. Lucia grasped her hand tightly, her voice steady. The person who gave you this clearly has malicious intent. You have to do something, Eleanor. Eleanor wiped her tears, fury igniting in her eyes. I won't let her harm my child. I have to confront this. Lucia nodded firmly. I'll help you. Here are the lab results. You need to show them to James. He needs to know the truth. Eleanor clutched the file tightly, her resolve burning. Thank you, Lucia. That evening, as James walked into the house, Eleanor was waiting for him in the living room. Her gaze was cold but steady. James, I need to talk to you. Seriously, Eleanor said, holding the file in her hand. James looked surprised. What is it, Eleanor? Eleanor held out the file. These are the test results for the tea your mother has been forcing me to drink. It contains substances that induce uterine contractions and could cause a miscarriage. James's eyes widened in shock as he took the file, his face paling as he read through it. No, this can't be. James stammered. Eleanor, are you sure about this? He looked at her, his voice trembling. Eleanor met his gaze, unwavering. Lucia tested it herself. This is the truth. Footsteps echoed on the stairs. Isabella appeared, her eyes as sharp as knives when she saw the file in James's hands. What is this about? Isabella asked, her voice cold. James turned to his mother, his voice heavy. Mother, did you give Eleanor this tea? Isabella didn't flinch. Yes. But I only wanted what's best for her. That baby shouldn't exist. James froze, staring at his mother in disbelief. Mother, what are you saying? Isabella stepped forward, her tone calm but icy. You don't understand, James. That baby will only disrupt our family. I did this for you. Eleanor stood tall, her voice resolute. No one has the right to decide my child's life but me. You've crossed the line. James looked at his mother, then at Eleanor, his eyes filled with regret. I'm sorry, Eleanor. I didn't realize things had gotten this far. Isabella stared at James, her expression cold and unmoving. Are you going to turn against me? James gripped the folder tightly, his voice firm. You no longer have the right to interfere in our lives. We're leaving. Isabella froze, her eyes darkening. You dare? Yes, I dare, James said decisively. I won't let you harm Eleanor or our child. Eleanor gently squeezed James's hand, feeling his determination. That night, Eleanor stood by the window, gazing into the dark garden. James approached her and wrapped his arms around her. I'm sorry for not believing you sooner, he whispered. Eleanor smiled faintly, tears streaming down her face. It's okay. What matters now is that we'll protect our child together. James bowed his head, placing a hand on Eleanor's belly. I promise, no one will ever hurt you or our baby again. Outside, the darkness began to fade, giving way to the light of dawn. Eleanor felt a growing sense of hope in her heart. The next morning, the mansion was filled with tense silence. Isabella sat motionless on the sofa, her face icy. She couldn't believe James had dared to defy her. Eleanor came down the stairs, clutching a small suitcase. James followed behind her, his gaze unwavering. We're leaving, Mother, James said firmly. Isabella stood abruptly, her eyes as sharp as daggers. You're leaving? What has she done to turn you against me? James clenched his fists. You've gone too far. I can't forgive what you've done to Eleanor and our child. Eleanor remained silent, looking at Isabella with unwavering determination. Isabella stepped closer, her voice cold and sharp. You think leaving will solve everything? This estate, this company, they're all under my control. What can she give you but trouble? James met his mother's gaze, his voice steady. I don't need any of it. All I need is for Eleanor and our child to be safe. Isabella sneered, her smile full of venom. Fine. Go. But don't you dare come crawling back to me. James grasped Eleanor's hand tightly, leading her out of the oppressive mansion. They left behind the cruel words and suffocating control. A few days later, Eleanor and James moved into a small but cozy apartment in the heart of the city. Free from Isabella's control, Eleanor felt more at peace than ever. Eleanor, I'm sorry for letting you endure so much for so long, James said, embracing her from behind, his voice filled with regret. Eleanor smiled softly, placing her hand over his. It's okay. What matters now is that we're safe. James kissed her hair. I'll protect you and our child, no matter what. One afternoon, James received a call from the family's lawyer. Mr. James, I need to meet with you to discuss some matters regarding the company, the lawyer's calm voice said over the phone. James frowned. What's going on? Mrs. Isabella has secretly altered the terms of your grandfather's will. This could have significant consequences for your inheritance. James tightened his grip on the phone. I'll meet you immediately. At the lawyer's office, James and Eleanor sat across from Mateo Ruiz, who had worked for their family for years. James, I've discovered that Mrs. Isabella covertly changed the terms of the will. If we don't act quickly, the entire estate will fall under her control, Mateo said gravely. James frowned. How could she do that without my consent? Mateo sighed. She took advantage of your grandfather's illness to pressure him into signing questionable documents. Eleanor squeezed James's hand. What can we do now? Mateo opened a folder and handed it to James. We need to gather evidence of this coercion. Fortunately, I retained some original copies of the will. James nodded, his eyes filled with resolve. I won't let her destroy our family's legacy. In the following days, James and Mateo filed a motion in court to investigate the legality of the documents Isabella had modified. The news quickly spread through the business community. When Isabella received notice from the court, her face turned pale. James dares to sue me. Isabella hissed, slamming a folder onto the desk. Caroline, James's younger sister, trembled. Mother, this will all work out, won't it? Isabella turned to her daughter, her gaze icy. Shut up. It's all because of her. That woman has turned James against me. The legal battle was intense. In court, James stood before the panel of judges, his eyes resolute. Your Honors, I have evidence that my mother coerced my grandfather into altering his will when he was no longer of sound mind, James said confidently, presenting the documents Mateo had preserved. Isabella's lawyer attempted to defend her, but James's compelling evidence rendered their arguments weak. Eleanor sat in the audience, gripping her hands tightly, her heart swelling with hope. Finally, the judge declared, the court finds the revised terms of the will to be invalid. All assets and management rights of the company will revert to Mr. James. Isabella stood frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. She abruptly rose to her feet, shouting, "No. This is a conspiracy. All of you are against me." James turned coldly to face his mother, looking her straight in the eye. "No one is against you. You destroyed everything yourself." Leaving the courthouse, Eleanor threw her arms around James. "We did it." James smiled faintly, holding her tightly. "I promise to protect you and our child." Eleanor gently stroked her belly, feeling the soft kicks from the baby. "Our child will grow up in a family filled with love." James bowed his head, placing his hand on Eleanor's belly. "I'll rebuild everything. No one will ever tear our family apart again." The afternoon sunlight shone softly, dispelling the shadows. Eleanor could feel happiness and peace slowly returning. In the days following the trial, the atmosphere in Eleanor and James's small apartment grew warm and peaceful. Eleanor felt relief now that Isabella was no longer controlling her. James spent more time caring for her and preparing for the baby's arrival. One morning, Eleanor sat on a rocking chair near the window, her hand gently caressing her pregnant belly. James walked out of the kitchen, holding a glass of warm milk. "Eleanor, here. The doctor said you need to take in more nutrients," James said gently. Eleanor took the glass, smiling. "Thank you. I feel so much more at ease now that I'm no longer living in fear." James knelt down, placing his hand on her belly. "We've overcome it all. I promise to do everything I can for you and our baby." Eleanor nodded softly, her eyes glistening with happiness. Meanwhile, Isabella sat silently in the large, empty mansion. The silence enveloped her, leaving her feeling hollow. All the power, wealth, and even her family had slipped away. The doorbell rang, pulling Isabella out of her thoughts. She walked to the door and found Mateo Ruiz, the family lawyer, standing there. "Mrs. Isabella, I'm here to deliver the final decision from the board of directors," Mateo said, handing her a folder. Isabella took it, flipping through the pages. Her face turned pale as she read the contents. She was officially removed from the company's board and stripped of all managerial control. "This can't be. It's all mine. I built all of this." Isabella screamed, her voice filled with despair. Mateo responded calmly, "You destroyed everything with your hatred. This is the consequence you must face." Isabella clenched the folder, her hands trembling with rage. But deep down, she knew it was over. One beautiful afternoon, Eleanor and James strolled through the park together. The fresh air made Eleanor feel at ease. They stopped at a bench, and James sat down, holding Eleanor's hand tightly. "I think we should host a small gathering with our close friends. A way to celebrate our baby's upcoming arrival," James said softly. Eleanor smiled, her eyes tender. "That's a wonderful idea. I want our child to grow up in an environment full of love." James nodded, his eyes shining with happiness. "We'll make that happen. I've reorganized my work at the company. I want to spend more time with you and the baby." Eleanor, deeply moved, squeezed his hand tightly. I'm so proud of you, James. Thank you for standing by me. James leaned in and kissed her forehead. I promise to protect you and our baby, and I'll never let anyone hurt you again. As time passed, Eleanor prepared for the baby's arrival. James was by her side every step of the way, from setting up the nursery to reading parenting books. One evening, while they were relaxing, James's phone rang. It was Matteo. James, I have important news. The court has issued its final decision regarding the company's ownership. All family assets are now officially under your control, Matteo said. James smiled faintly. Thank you, Matteo. Finally, it's over. Sitting beside him, Eleanor looked at him curiously. What's going on? James took her hand. I just got the news. All the assets and the company are now ours. Mother will no longer have any chance to interfere. Eleanor let out a sigh of relief. Finally, it's all behind us. James pulled her into his arms. I'll start fresh and build something better. No more hatred, only love. A few months later, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy baby girl. James couldn't contain his joy as he held their newborn for the first time. Eleanor, our daughter is perfect, James said, his voice full of emotion. Eleanor smiled weakly, watching their baby sleep peacefully in his arms. I want to name her Sophia. It symbolizes wisdom and peace. James kissed their daughter's forehead. Welcome to the world, Sophia. In that moment, James realized that all the struggles they had endured were worth it. Their small family had finally found happiness. One morning, James and Eleanor brought baby Sophia to visit the old mansion. The house was quiet, with no sign of Isabella. From a distance, Isabella watched them, her eyes filled with sorrow. She stood silently in the shadows, watching her son's small family enjoy their happiness. James noticed his mother from afar but didn't approach her. He simply said to Eleanor, she chose her own path. We can't change that. Eleanor gently squeezed his hand and nodded. What matters is that we've protected our family. James lifted Sophia high in the air, the sunlight illuminating her small face. He smiled, feeling pure happiness. From now on, everything will be different. Our family will only have love and peace. Eleanor rested her head on James's shoulder, her heart full of hope. Their turbulent journey had ended, giving way to a new chapter filled with love and happiness. Eleanor's story carries a profound lesson about courage and the strength of love. Faced with control and harm from Isabella, Eleanor refused to give in, standing firm to protect herself and her child. Her determination and faith in justice helped her overcome every obstacle. At the same time, the story emphasizes that blind power and control lead to loneliness and loss. Love, unity, and kindness are the true foundations of lasting happiness.
If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.